Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
G here, talking budget decks for the new format. I did this last format. A lot of people seem to enjoy it, and since Nim pretty much has the overall top 10 decks wrapped up, this works for me. Now this time I'm making a slight adjustment because of recent reprints in the extra deck things like 101, Exiton Knight, Draco Sack. I'm covering both the main and the extra in this video for $150 or less. We're not going to include Vanity's Emptiness in any of these decks because, I mean, let's be honest, that would eat up $75 out of our $150 budget. I mean, we don't want to spend half of our money on 3 cards. And yes, this does immediately eliminate Shadow's Burning Abyss and S-Knights. I mean, it pretty much takes out the big 3, but we've still got some really good decks in here for those of you guys who are playing on a budget. This is the top 10 budget decks of the format, the Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Number 10, Yang Zing. So Yang Zing makes this list purely on potential and nothing else. It actually hasn't done enough to warrant being on the list, but in new challengers, they are getting a tuner, they're getting an amazing synchro, and they're also getting a decent beat stick, which should help getting to those higher level synchros and just make the whole process a lot easier. Although I could argue you probably don't want to draw the card very often. I'm not crazy about how skill drain dependent the deck appears to be, but I actually think that Regeki being unbanned helps the deck because generally you're going to want your opponent to burn a card, simple monster removal on your field, thinking that they're going to be able to make some advantage when actually it's probably going to help you further your plays. So I think that Yang Zing do have some potential in this format. Number 9, plant variants, including, but not limited to, anything involving Junk Synchron, Supervise, Karakuri Machinas, and Titanium, but not including Sylvans because that's another deck. So you'd be surprised how much of a difference one card makes. The plant engine is almost back at full strength, and with the addition of Glow Up Bulb, some of these decks like Gigavise and Karakuri Plants, I mean, you can pull off some ridiculous OTKs. If you don't believe me, ask Joe Girolano. I think that the potential of dropping multiple level 8 synchros in one turn without using Soul Charge is once again a very high possibility. You can once again do some dirty shenanigans like the double Colossal Fighter, Armory Arm OTK. You just have to really look up on these decks. I do think that there might be some initial consistency issues because no one's really going to know the blueprint of the deck and how exactly your ratios should work out. So, you know, buyer beware on that part. Number 8, Sylvans. So Sylvans did lose a couple of copies of a card that I thought largely defined them as a deck, but they did get in exchange another amazing plant to the fold, and that of course being Glow Up Bulb. And I think that with Miracle Fertilizer at 3, the deck can still function perfectly fine. My biggest concern is how much the deck is actually hurt by Vanity's Emptiness. I mean, if you don't have, what's her name, Rose Archer or something like that, like immediately, it just seems like you can just be shredded by this one card. And we know that pretty much every deck is going to be looking for a way to get Vanity's Emptiness in there. So I'm thinking that 3 Kurashumo might have to be temporarily the standard so that when you go with Kari Bandit or possibly Mount Sylvania, you start excavating, you have ways of basically getting free MSTs to get rid of those problem cards. Number 7, Fire Fist. So Wolfbark back at 3 does give the deck significantly more offense than it had in the past, and it lets you play much more aggressively with your bears. Don't get me wrong, I like Wolfbark and everything, but I think that the deck can more so thrive right now because it really isn't affected by any one floodgate card in the game not named Skill Drain. And I think that if Fire Fist, if the players can actually control the graveyard with, you know, possibly main deck things like Soul Drain, Dimensional Fissures, maybe even Shadow Mirror, I believe that Bear can once again become a nightmare. I mean, it can be one of those cards where we're looking at it as one of the defining monsters in the game. And I think not having to worry about Super Poly for the first half of the format pretty much puts my mind at ease as far as the Shadow matchup goes. And considering that there's been so much back row, you know, played in the last couple of formats, I think that Goyoku just looks better every single day. Number 6, Monarch / High Tribute variants. So the reason that I like Monarchs and High Tribute variants right now is I look at them and I just think about the past few months, and I just think that the potential of the deck has continually risen, even if nobody has noticed. I mean, Stormforth not only gave the deck outs to some of the biggest problems that it had in Leo and Bujins, but it meant that you could still attack that turn, which was just a huge hindrance with a card like Soul Exchange. And Gores being at 2 seems like a no-brainer because it's a way to potentially just steal games that you shouldn't have won. But you know, Gores plus Regeki is a really good combo. I also think that when you look at the 1 tribute pool, cards like Vanity's Fiend, Majesty's Fiend, and Ryza, these are no jokes. You know, the Ryza locks, they can be definitely real. And I feel like the deck right now is less reliant on the Frog engine than it's been probably in years. Number 5, Battery Men. So I can speak from personal experience with this one. Super Polymerization and Soul Charge were one of the things that were really holding Battery Men down against Shadows, and this is a matchup that I feel like with those 2 cards at 1 is definitively in Battery Men's favor. And with Regeki back in the game and it probably being an instant staple in this deck, those ridiculously stupid level easy OTKs that you could pull off, yeah, your mom who doesn't even play Yu-Gi-Oh, she can probably OTK with Battery Man right now. Vanity's Emptiness at 3 is not a problem for this deck because you almost never leave home without 3 copies of Trap Stun. I am a little concerned about Gores. I mean, speaking from experience, you just really don't have an answer to the card outside of Solemn Warning. And then, of course, Burning Abyss is still your worst matchup probably across the board. That's a little concerning as well. Number 4, Evilswarm. So Evilswarm more or less makes this list by default, mainly because the more relevant that Synchro Summoning and Fusions become in the game, the better that Ophion becomes as a result. And despite the fact that none of your monsters float, Pandemic is still a searchable lance for your entire archetype. So I don't really think that Regeki is going to be much of an issue for the deck. I think that Evilswarm, I mean, they have the ability to main deck tons of Floodgate cards like Macro, Soul Drain, Dimensional Fissure. I think that gives them an edge against Shadows and Burning Abyss, despite the fact that they're both, you know, they're all dark decks, so they can't side mirrors against each other. And I think that you have a really solid deck here. You look at Pendulums coming out and new challengers, and I think that Ophion's just going to keep getting better and better as, I mean, Kleeports aren't going to have much fun with Ophion on board. Number 3, Bujin. So I feel like the hits, the Archfiend, and Super Polymerization, I mean, they definitely benefit Bujins as a deck. Infernity were just a pain in the ass matchup, and Super Poly, well, against Shadows, it just kind of wrecked your day. Your entire deck is light, and you don't really have any way of counteracting the card. So those both going to 1 are going to benefit Bujins. And I kind of look across the board at all the high level decks, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'll take Bujins against most of those decks. I think nearly every deck in the format is going to struggle against Kaiser Coliseum, and with a lot of players opting to take MST out of the main deck, I feel like Royal Decree can cause some havoc here. I mean, especially when you got players like Jeff Jones main decking upwards of 20 traps in their Burning Abyss. Also, I think about Regeki plus Bujin Carnation and my mouth begins to water because it's so much more appealing than anything you could ever do with Dark Hole. I think that Bujins have to go back to protect the castle, you know, Royal Decree and Kaiser Coliseum, basically making sure that your opponent can't, you know, set up a field or, you know, create any type of field presence. Number 2, Lightsworn. So much like Battery Man, this is a deck that should only benefit from Regeki's unbanning. Even against fields that mainly float, your mindset is simple. I mean, nuke the board and then OTK your opponent. I also think that Gores has the potential to help the deck, although not nearly as much as something like Monarchs, mainly because in Lightsworn, you could potentially mill your Gorses and then they have absolutely no impact. I don't think that losing the soul charges is going to hurt the deck as much as many believe. In fact, the last regional top 8 version of Lightsworn I saw actually only main deck 2 copies of soul charge. So, I mean, you're really only losing 1 card in theory. I guess I'm so high on Lightsworn because of the fast lightning pace that the deck can play at. I mean, you can pretty much burn through over half your deck by turn 2. And because Lightsworn is pretty much, they've proven that they can do it. Number 1, Madolche. So Madolche are the king of the hill for one reason and one reason only. Queen Tiramisu is still an incredibly powerful and unfair card in a format where a lot of the monsters in the top decks, they don't really mind going to the graveyard and dying because, you know, either they'll be resummoned by Altair or when they die, they'll just activate and summon something else. she basically comes out and says, yeah, fuck you, that's not going to happen, because she spins back to the deck and she doesn't target, and spinning back to the deck is probably second only in the game to banishing. I think there is a little bit of OTK potential hiding somewhere in the Madolche deck, and I think that Soul Charge going to 1 immensely improves your matchups across the board, because I mean, Madolche couldn't play the card anyway. When your monster died, they tag back into the deck, so you could never really make use of it. So let me know what you guys think. Were there any decks that I missed? If there were, leave that in the comment section below. Thank you for watching as always.